Good morning, everyone. Good morning. This is Bill Miles with the Hilton Head Island-Bluffton Chamber of Commerce, and welcome back to our weekly town hall. We're so glad to have you with us. We're glad to the listeners that dialed in this morning and are also listening on Facebook Live as well as on the Beaufort County channel. You know, we've got a great lineup of guests today where we'll be hearing a local, regional, as well as a statewide, national perspectives. And speaking about national, we all know that we're 6 days away from a historic election, and we're all looking forward to that day, I think, of having that election behind us. I want to give a shout out to our businesses that we have participating. The Chamber began an initiative that is called Adopt a Precinct, and we've asked the business community to come together and adopt a precinct, which means that they'll be feeding poll workers on election day. So about 290 to 300 poll workers will be having a breakfast or lunch or snacks that are provided from the local business community. And hopefully you'll check out our social media, not only this week, but on election day as well. And by doing so, you can like and support some of the things that those businesses are doing. We know that the poll workers are valuable, and their time is important, and their mission is critical. And so we just ask that you support them, and thank you to those businesses who are listening that are adopting a precinct. Then I'm sure most of you heard the news last week, and it was a big week as we announced that Southwest Airlines has indicated its intent to serve the Savannah Hilton Head International Airport. And that's just fantastic news. And certainly from a resident perspective or a visitor perspective, having more ways to travel to and from the region is very, very positive. You know, I was thinking about it, and it's good for the quality of life. It's good for that. It's good for our real estate. It's good for our residents, and it's good for business. And they'll be announcing their routes soon, so stay tuned to see where they'll be flying. And, you know, we're very, very fortunate to have a great destination and have two airports that service these great destinations. And we trust that you'll continue supporting those as we continue to work on air service recruitment. And that's it's an economic development initiative that's not measured in days, but it's measured in years. And there have been a number of people, and the result of many, many strong partnerships that helped bring that initiative to fruition. And it was just a few short weeks ago, I remember we had Southwest airline executives here that we were hosting on Hilton Head Island and in Sea Pines, as well as in Bluffton and Palmetto Bluff, and then several different locations, I should say, in Savannah. And I'm proud to tell you that they were really blown away by the vibrance and the beauty of our area, of our region. And they're proud to be joining in and supporting air service here in the region. So stay tuned for the routes. We'll be coming out with those in the very near future. You know, we've never been more aware of the impact that Washington, D.C. has on our lives as we continue to navigate the election and this pandemic simultaneously. We're fortunate to have back with us again today for an update on small business from D.C., the U.S. Chamber Vice President of Small Business Policy, and that's Tom Sullivan. And Tom's been a guest several times during our Tele-Town halls, and we're certainly indebted to him for doing that. He leads the charge for our small business community in Washington, which, if you didn't know, is the world's largest business organization, representing companies across every sector of the economy. And just so you know, we're proud members of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and our local members also count on the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to support their voice, our voice in Washington, D.C. And it's hard to fathom that over 100 years they've been advocating on behalf of business that help create jobs and grow our economy. Tom, it's great to see you again. It's great to have you with us. And how about an update on how things in Washington are impacting small business?
Well, thank you, Bill. I'm going to try to share a screen real quick, and I'm going to scream through these slides because your team has been so engaged. Many of these things have been presented to your team before. Really only 3 slides, and that's mostly just to keep me on track. Bill, you and I work real closely together, and you know that I get a little worked up about these issues affecting small business. So having 3 slides in front of me helps me stay on track and not get too emotional about things and go down on rabbit holes. So thank you for your patience in advance. I'm going to go right down to the bottom bullet of this first slide. I mean, you all know certainly that if you looked back 8 months ago, and it seems like 8 years ago, but at the beginning of the pandemic, there was an amazing amount of action and activity and advocacy pushing Congress that actually worked. And Bill, you're perhaps too humble to mention, but you, and then we cloned you about 2,600 times to create this army of local and state chambers of commerce who pushed for stimulus and really has made a difference. I'm not saying that it's saved all small business, but it's saved some, and that's actually something to be very, very proud of. The last bullet on this slide talks about a survey that we did with MetLife. And as you know, Bill, we survey small businesses every quarter as part of our partnership with MetLife. And we asked them specifically about the election. Now, we didn't ask who they're going to vote for because, as you know, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce does not weigh in on the presidential elections, although we are very involved in local and state congressional races. But as far as this election, what I found not news and then real news was, first of all, not news. All right. The economy is the top issue for small business owners. Now, if that had been any other result, I actually would have been shocked. It's not. And it's no shock to you, Bill, that consistent with every presidential that we've had in recent history, economy is the top issue for small business owners. So not really news there. However, what I do view it as news is that 62% of small businesses are more engaged, more motivated to vote in this election than in 4 years ago. And I think that, at least for me, that was an eye-opener. Now, just to rewind the tape a little bit about stuff that we've been doing and we continue to do, and I'll get in a little bit about how we're balancing advocacy and education at this point in time. But we have been pushing, with your help, and as I had said, about 2,600 Bill Miles clones around the country for additional help for small businesses. But we haven't stopped there, actually. If our advocacy hasn't worked, then we go to court. And actually, we scored a major immigration victory recently where worker visas that have been prohibited actually are now available for application for U.S. Chamber members. So there's actually 4 associations that were successful in court, and the court said, wow, you have convinced us that businesses that are part of the organizations that sued this administration to free up the application process for worker visas deserve to actually get those visa applications in. So I'm sure that if this court stay continues through the spring, I know certainly that your members will benefit because of the number of foreign visas that help out the local economy. Right now, as we get closer to Thanksgiving, the primary benefit are the winter vacation spots like Park City, Utah, for instance. they actually are huge beneficiaries of U.S. Chamber of Commerce in court, that when advocacy in front of Congress doesn't necessarily work, then we certainly have the backstop of going to court all the way to the Supreme Court on behalf of the business community, and in particular on behalf of the small business community, which is the lens that I generally look through. So last slide, but certainly not the least, and it's important because of this moment in time. Despite all the success that we've had advocating before Congress, we're at a stalemate. It's not a surprise that immediately before an election, we're at a political standstill, but it's still disappointing. We would think that with the news talking about a new surge of coronavirus cases, that Congress would have been able to come together to pass a small business stimulus package. I'm embarrassed to say, mostly because I work in Washington, D.C., I'm embarrassed to say Congress was not able to put partisan differences aside and help small business. And I think if you look at well, what happened, if we were to dissect what happened, the U.S. Chambers of Commerce's position is that none of the initiatives that started chugging along in the House or the Senate started at a bipartisan place. Speaker Pelosi had a Democratic proposal. Sure, it gained some Republicans at the end of the day, but it didn't start and be negotiated as a bipartisan package. Majority Leader McConnell in the Senate also put together a package which would have done incredible things for small business. And I want to point out that one of the key supporters of Mitch McConnell's plan was Lindsey Graham on liability reform. And that, as you know, Bill, Senator Graham, who's the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, hasn't always been on the same page as the U.S. Chamber as far as legal reform. And when it comes to helping business during the pandemic, he was fully on board on the required liability protections that our businesses need in order to guarantee that they're going to continue to grow out of a reopening scenario out of COVID-19 pandemic. And so I just want to point that out. I'm sure that most of your members already know that because you're getting the daily ad barrage related to Senator Graham's election. But it is at least worth pointing out that he championed the liability protections. Now, it didn't go anywhere. It didn't get it to the president's desk, unfortunately, because it started as a purely Republican relief package. And so you have Speaker Pelosi's purely Democratic package. You have Leader McConnell's purely Republican package. Unfortunately, it's not going to become, neither of these are going to become law. What we had hoped, and we continue to push, is that groups like the Problem Solvers Caucus, that came up with a blueprint of what could actually work. And all they did was take the jigsaw puzzles of the different proposals, the Senate jigsaw puzzle and the House jigsaw puzzle. They simply reassembled those jigsaw puzzles into a bipartisan package, and which is great news. The bad news is there aren't enough members in the Problem Solvers Caucus to actually get that proposal past a press release and an outline. So it is unfortunate. We believe it, as far as doing a forensic analysis of what happened, the lack of a starting point at a bipartisan small business relief package is what doomed its passage to the president's desk. But we're going to keep pushing. Soon as those polls close, we're going to be pushing aggressively to make sure that Congress reconsider a small business relief package. Now, when Congress isn't doing anything, that doesn't mean that we can't help your members and the small business members all across the country. And we've shifted a little bit into an education mode. Just because we can't pass new stimulus legislation does not mean that there isn't assistance available. So we have reinvigorated our Save Small Business initiative. The URL is here on the screen, uschamber.com, Save Small Business. And on that website, there are tools, tips, and resources of where small businesses can get funding, sometimes even grant funding at a state level in order to help survive the pandemic. I'll give you a for instance. So you probably already know this, but South Carolina has a community loan fund. This is subsidized in part by congressionally passed CARES Act funding. And so we are trying to use this portal of the Save Small Business Initiative to drill down locally in several states where you say, look, just because the federal government hasn't passed new laws doesn't mean there aren't resources out there. We're trying to get that information through you and through all your partners to as many small businesses as necessary. So Bill, thank you for inviting me to join your town hall this morning, and I'll stop sharing the slides. I'll make these slides available to your team afterwards if you need them. Happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom. First question comes to us this morning from Mark, and Mark is asking, will Congress pass a bill that allows businesses to not treat PPP loans as taxable income?
Not before next week, Mark. I wish they would. There are two things going on about the treatment of PPP funds. So first of all, there was an unfortunate IRS ruling that did exactly what Mark pointed out, and that is it treats some of that as taxable income. So you can't take the business deductions for things that have already been forgiven. Our friend Senator Cornyn from Texas has legislation that's trying to reverse that. We're strong supporters of that, but it hasn't gone anywhere. The other part of it is the grant. If you got an economic injury disaster loan from the U.S. Small Business Administration, some of those disaster loans were accompanied by a grant. And there is some difference of opinion on how that grant is treated for tax purposes. We're working with Congress, and quite frankly, we're working with IRS to try to make sure that Congress's intent isn't bastardized the way that IRS did in a previous ruling, and treat it in a way that frees up liquidity with small business. But it would be better if Congress actually passed a law and told IRS to do it, and that hasn't happened yet. We're pushing for its inclusion in a small business stimulus. It won't happen before the election, but we're optimistic that it'll happen after the election.
Thank you for that answer, Tom. And November the 28th, we're partnering with you and the U.S. Chamber again on Shop Small Business Saturday. And just wondered if you might take a minute to talk about that and really the significance of that day for small business.
Well, Bill, thank you for mentioning it. I mean, this is you patronizing your local business, whether it's a restaurant, a boutique, whether you've got to scramble to get gift cards that can be used at a later date. It doesn't matter. But what does matter is that you pay attention to your local businesses and you patronize them, especially on November 28th. So I'd equate this to surfing in Hawaii, which I've never done. But if you don't build that wave, nothing's going to happen. And we need to build this wave leading up to November 28th and hit November 28th as a shop small day in order to kind of keep that wave going through the holiday season. And I know you're a leader in this effort. We're partnering with American Express and others, and fingers crossed that it be successful. There's some good news coming out of the retail sector. And so there's plenty to be optimistic about, but it ain't going to happen unless all of us kind of chip in, look locally, shop locally, and then really make as big of a deal of November 28th as possible.
Thank you for that. Next question, Tom, comes to us from Chris. And Chris is asking, what do you feel is the most impactful thing our small business community can do to encourage additional stimulus out of Washington?
Well, doubling down on their local chamber dues is a good start. Keep doing what you're doing. I feel a little bit about being at the pulpit and telling the folks in the congregation to go to church. You know, the 50 to 100 folks that you get on this webcast every week, Bill, you're already doing your part. But to take a moment and to send you, Bill, a little note saying, hey, Bill, please help me convince Congress to help save small business. Something as simple as that does make a difference. Because, Bill, I know that you forward that immediately onto our team, and then we try to walk it up or email it up to Capitol Hill. So if you have a few extra minutes in the day, zap Bill Miles a note. Say, please, Bill, thank you for everything you're doing, and please forward this message to Congress. It would make a big difference.
All right. Well, thank you, Tom. And that's going to take care of our questions for today. We appreciate you being with us again. And you look good in that U.S. Chamber Small Business vest there.
Oh, well, thank you. I had to suit up right during the introduction. So it's
That's
nice,
right.
nice being able to work from home in my basement and then somehow create the illusion that I'm right in front of our building in Washington, D.C.
Well, you're doing a good job of that. You're doing a great job of representing small business. Thanks for being with us again this morning, Tom.
Thank you for your partnership, Bill.
You're welcome. All right. That was Tom Sullivan with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And as we move forward, we're going to transition that to taking a statewide perspective and looking from an economist. And the economist is Dr. Von Nessen of the Darla Moore School of Business at USC. And he specializes in regional economics and forecasting. Also, he's responsible for the preparation and presentation of USC's annual statewide economic forecast. And he's also regularly invited to brief the Federal Reserve Board on our state's economy. He's a frequent speaker about business, housing markets, and local economies. And we're pleased to have with us this morning Dr. Joey Von Nessen.
Well, good morning, Bill, and thank you again for inviting me to participate and to be with you today. It's a pleasure to be with all of you this morning. And what I want to spend a few minutes doing this morning is just recap where we are in South Carolina, what the recovery has looked like for our state so far, and what we anticipate and what we need to be on the lookout for going forward, both for the rest of 2020 and into 2021. Because as we all know, we've seen a major paradigm shift in the U.S. economy, indeed in the global economy, and that certainly affected us here in South Carolina as well. So starting out, I want to just briefly recap what has been happening to South Carolina, first where we were back in March. And if we look at the data, between March and April of this year, South Carolina lost about 276,000 jobs. That represents about 13% of the total workforce in South Carolina. And that places us right in the middle of the pack when we compare ourselves to all other states in terms of the percentage of the workforce that we lost, again, between March and April during the height of the shutdown period. And where we rank relative to other states mostly depends on our industry composition, and it depends on the intensity and the length of the shutdown period itself. And so that put us at number 25. Now, which industries were hardest hit? Number one, as we all know, was leisure and hospitality. Number two was manufacturing. And number three was healthcare and healthcare related services. And for leisure and hospitality, it was hit especially hard. We saw a loss of about 50%, 50% of the jobs in leisure and hospitality were lost between April of 2020 when we compare that to April of 2019. It's still down about 17%. It's recovered significantly since then, but that just puts some perspective on really the intensity of how hard leisure and hospitality had been hit overall. If we look regionally, we can see that within South Carolina, if we look at the different major regions of the state, the primary factors influencing how hard they were hit was the industry composition. So if we look in the coastal regions of South Carolina, they were the hardest hit as a group because of being mostly concentrated in leisure and hospitality, or more so relative to the rest of South Carolina. If we look in the upstate, where manufacturing is the primary industry cluster, we saw that sector or that region hit fairly hard as well. The Midlands in Columbia was spared a bit more relative to those other major areas. Once again, simply because there is less manufacturing and less leisure and hospitality as a percentage of the total workforce in Columbia and in the Midlands region. So the Midlands has fared a little bit better so far. Now, what about our progress so far? What have we seen throughout the spring months and into the summer and moving into the fall where we are? A couple of ways that we can look at that. First, we can look at the unemployment rate for South Carolina itself. We were at historically low unemployment in the U.S. and in South Carolina going into 2020. And our unemployment rate in South Carolina in March was 3.2%. That jumped up to 12.8% in April, and it has since come down to 5.1% as of September, which is the most recent data that we have available at this point. So we've made fairly steady progress. And if we translate that into the number of jobs that we've gained back, it looks, if we put an estimate on that, we gained back about 72% of the jobs that we lost. So going back to that 276,000 number, that the total number of jobs we lost between March and April, we've gained back about 72% so far. And to put that in perspective, it took us 5 years in the aftermath of the Great Recession to regain 100% of the jobs that we lost. So 5 years for 100% versus 72% over the span of about 6 months. And that is evidence of a V-shaped recovery pattern. When economists talk about a V-shape, where we see a rapid contraction and a rapid rebound, that's what we mean. And you really see that when you put this recovery in context with what was happening during the Great Recession. Now, that's really good news for South Carolina. And we are also seeing growth that is outpacing the national average. So we recovered about 72% of our jobs. The US as a whole has recovered about 55%. But that's only half the story. Because even though we saw a V-shaped recovery pattern in South Carolina through the summer, we actually transitioned to a U-shaped recovery pattern beginning in July. A U-shaped recovery pattern meaning more slow and steady growth as opposed to a rapid recovery and a rapid rebound. So that began in July, and the question is why? What drove that change from a V-shaped to a U-shaped recovery pattern? And there are a couple of different answers to that. Number one, we saw a spike in COVID cases in July in the aftermath of the July 4th holiday. We probably all remember that as people, the weather was nice and we had a first major holiday, and we just began to see people becoming more frequent with their social interactions and getting outside, and that led to that spike in cases, which created problems with consumer and business confidence and ramifications for policy changes as well that were changing enforcements of social distancing and other policy priorities. So that was a major effect. Secondly, we also began to see what I call PPP fund exhaustion beginning in the summer, meaning that businesses that had applied for and received PPP funds were beginning to use up those dollars by July and in the later summer. And many of them were going back to having to rely on market demand. Some of them were not able to do that as successfully. And so we saw businesses begin to lay off workers or cut back in economic activity in a way that they had been able to avoid doing up until that point because of having the PPP funding available, particularly for payroll as it was designed. So that was a factor creating a bit of a drag on the recovery in the later part of the summer and into where we are today in the fall. And then finally, there have just simply been some short-run limitations on economic activity for small businesses. So even though they began to open back up, think about the case of a restaurant. It may open back up and you see a quick, significant increase in economic activity, but at the same time, they haven't been able to open at full capacity, either because of social distancing restrictions from a policy standpoint, or because of just a general lack of demand, which we're seeing in some cases to some extent across the board. So all of those had an effect and contributed to that shift from a V to a U-shaped recovery. So then looking ahead, if we look ahead to 2020 and into 2021, the next logical question becomes, first of all, will we see any improvement in our rate of recovery between now and the end of the year? That shift from that V to that U-shaped recovery pattern, will our U-shaped recovery, will that improve? Will we see more rapid growth between now and the end of the year? And I think the short answer to that is no, probably not. There are a couple of reasons for that that I'll go through very quickly. Number one is we are seeing right now some disruptions to labor productivity due to the fact that school has gone back into session. And in many cases, that's been virtual schooling, which has caused many parents to need to stay home and thus have either dropped out of the workforce entirely or are requiring more flexible schedules, both of which are impacting labor productivity for businesses. And one way we can see that very clearly is the fact that the labor force itself in South Carolina has declined significantly since August, since school started. So if we look at that unemployment rate in South Carolina of 5.1%, what we find is that the unemployment rate would actually be closer to 8% if we were to account for the change in the labor force, that decline in the labor force that we've seen since August. So we're still improving, we're still recovering, but again, not quite at the rate that the unemployment rate would suggest. And the virtual schooling is slowing that down a bit. Secondly, we're not likely, as we already heard, to get any more fiscal stimulus this year. That's going to be a critical element to continue our recovery. COVID cases also on the rise right now, which will continue to affect business and consumer confidence and create additional uncertainty, as will any protracted election consequences. If we do see any type of contested election that takes, let's say, 4 to 6 weeks to resolve, if we do see that happen between now and the end of the year, once again, just creating more volatility and more uncertainty that lend us to think that the pace of recovery that we're seeing now for the state's economy is about as good as we will see between now and the end of the year. Now, looking ahead to 2021, what are our more long-term projections? A couple of comments here. First, I think it's important to note we will not get a full recovery until we get some sort of widespread treatment or vaccine, period. That's an important point to make. So that's where we start as our foundation. But having said that, many industries will recover as we move forward. And we can, if you have any questions about specific industries in South Carolina, we can talk about those. But I'll just briefly mention that if we look who's been doing well this year and who's likely to do well next year, residential construction, manufacturing, which has largely recovered this year in South Carolina, particularly auto manufacturing, e-commerce and logistics, transportation and distribution related industries, all doing very well in South Carolina in 2020. Leisure and hospitality and commercial real estate are really the two biggest areas that continue to struggle right now, and that we project will that will continue into 2021. Our specific forecast for recovery, if we define recovery as when we recover 100% of the jobs that were lost, that is when we get back to that employment level we were at in March of 2020, we anticipate that will happen likely between the fall of 2021 and the fall of 2022. So 2021, we anticipate will be a year of recovery. And I know that's a broad range. And the reason for that is because there's still a lot of uncertainty. There are three factors that will influence whether we see a faster or a slower recovery on the more optimistic or pessimistic side of that range. The most important of which is fiscal stimulus, as you all well know. There's broad consensus that we need additional stimulus from the Federal Reserve. Most economists have mentioned this. And if we look at in the political spectrum on both sides, there's bipartisan recognition that additional stimulus is needed. The only debate is about how big and what specifically it's going to entail. But that's going to be a critical component in 2021. Secondly, of course, the vaccine and the treatment, how quickly does that become available? And then one other element here, too, that's important to recognize is changes in tax legislation next year, which could potentially create a somewhat of a drag on an economic recovery. This would be more likely to occur if we see the so-called blue wave, if we see a Democratic White House and Senate. But having said that, we don't know that there's necessarily going to be an appetite for any tax increase if the economy is not in any better shape in early next year than it is right now. So a lot of uncertainty there, but definitely another factor that we need to be thinking about in terms of what's going to affect the pace of recovery. So that's the state view. And then I'll just make a couple of quick comments on Hilton Head, and then I'll be happy to take your questions. In general, Hilton Head has not seen the employment losses that the rest of coastal South Carolina has. So it's fared a bit better overall. Beaufort and Jasper counties specifically have maintained lower unemployment rates or higher rates of employment relative to the state average, has consistently outpaced the state average and continues to do so up through September, again, where we have the latest data available. And just a quick discussion about why. One reason that we have seen this is because if you look at the recovery in the U.S. and in South Carolina as a whole, it's been fairly uneven in the sense that if you look at jobs and occupations that are higher wage, higher skilled positions, those that require post-secondary education, when you just look at the recovery for those those occupations and the industries that hire those workers, they're actually doing pretty well. Employment in those categories is up about 5% year to date, which is actually pretty strong considering everything that's been happening. But if we look at industries that hire occupations and workers that are typically lower skilled, lower wage positions that don't require education beyond high school, job growth in those occupations and sectors is down about 10% year to date. So that's a pretty big spread, minus 10 versus plus 5. And one of the things that we see in Hilton Head is that it typically skews more towards the former category in terms of industry composition and workforce. We see that Hilton Head tends to have higher average incomes and wages relative to even other areas of coastal South Carolina, Myrtle Beach, and Charleston. And it has a very strong construction market and second homes market. And as I mentioned, residential construction is doing very well this year. So there are a number of reasons why Hilton Head has been doing better relative to the state average. So a lot of information that we've gone through at the state and the local level. So I will go ahead and stop there. Bill, I'll turn it back over to you, and I'm happy to take any questions on any aspect of what we talked about.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Von Nessen, for that very thorough overview. And we appreciate that. The first question is going to come to us this morning from Bonnie. And Bonnie's asking if you can talk a little bit about the housing market impact. We've seen a little bit of a boom, or quite a bit of a boom here on Hilton Head Island and in Bluffton. Just if you could elaborate on that.
Sure. So residential construction has done, as you know, across the board very well, whether we're looking in Hilton Head or we're looking in South Carolina or the US. And the reason is basically gets back to what I just mentioned about that uneven recovery. And the fact that if you look at home buyers in general, if you look at their characteristics, they typically fall into that former category, more higher wage, higher skilled jobs, typically what we consider more traditional white collar jobs where people can work from home, right, that have largely not been disrupted by the effects of social distancing and the pandemic as a whole. And so given that that's where the demand has largely come from, that's why we're seeing fairly high unemployment rates coupled with very strong residential housing demand. Normally you would think that's kind of crazy, right? Because employment growth is the single best predictor that we have for housing demand in normal economic times. So it seems on the surface contradictory, but given the nature of who this pandemic has hit, it's actually fully consistent. Now, when we talk about Hilton Head specifically, and one other aspect that makes Hilton Head a bit more unique is that this is a place that people are going to be drawn to, number one, if they are looking to move to South Carolina, which we're seeing more of now that people are looking for areas of the country that have a lower cost of living relative to a New York or a San Francisco, say, where they can have more ability to spread out, and they have more options because now this work from home environment is beginning to take off. So that's another element for additional demand. We're also seeing people, particularly workers who are older, getting closer to retirement or working part-time, that may be or that have been dropping out of the labor force entirely because they don't have to work. And this is a situation where they may be taking that opportunity to transition. Once again, if they're retiring, Hilton Head becomes an attractive location as well. And it's always been that way. And as the population continues to, as the baby boomers continue to retire, South Carolina and Hilton Head will benefit from that. So there are a number of factors that are really driving this strong residential housing demand right now. And I think the good news is that the demand that we're seeing is likely to continue into 2021. I don't see this as a bubble. I see this as sustainable. Very different from commercial real estate, but I think residential housing is going to look pretty good, at least through 2021.
Thank you for that. That's very encouraging. Next question is coming from Margaret. I'm sorry. This one's from Margaret, and Margaret is asking. You mentioned that healthcare was the third hardest hit industry in the state of South Carolina, and when do you see that bouncing back?
It's already bouncing back, actually, and it's doing. They're back to about 95% of levels that they were at before COVID began. So healthcare healthcare, the areas that were affected in healthcare were primarily non-emergency related services. So if you think about physical therapy and dentist visits, eye care, all these activities, all these services that everybody requires, but most of them are not emergency. Non-emergency surgery is another example. So these are things that we can put off at least for a short period of time, and so that's where that reduction has come from. But now we're getting to the point as the economy is opening back up, people are having to go back and again go through the normal services that they need, which is why we're seeing the recovery come back. In fact, early on in the summer, the biggest single category for job gains was actually dentists' offices, if you can believe that. That's kind of something that nobody really expects, but it makes sense when we think about the nature of how these services are playing out and the nature of the shutdown. But the bottom line is that healthcare is coming back. We're seeing most of the major medical facilities across the state that are getting closer to capacity to where they were before. But we also have to consider there are going to be some long-run transitions more to telehealth and telemedicine, which is a separate conversation. That transition is going to continue, but that's more of a long-term factor. In the short run, though, healthcare is again, about at 95% capacity, more or less at this point.
All right, Dr. Von Nessen, thank you so much for joining us. Again, he is the research economist with the Darla Moore School of Business at the University of South Carolina. Very thorough update this morning. We're glad to have you and look forward to hearing another update from you at some point in time.
Sounds great. Thank you, Bill.
Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
All right, you too.
We'll come a little closer to home now and just thinking about if the size of your community was going to reported that going to triple in the next few years, what type of economic growth that would look like. And that's what they're talking about in Hardeeville. And we're delighted that to have the mayor of Hardeeville, Harry Williams, with us today. And Mayor Williams, with the governor's announcement last month of the new exit plan for I-95, which he certainly called an economic engine for Hardeeville and the region. Along with that, and the development of the 136 acres with over 200 homes of mixed use and commercial growth. The game is on right now for Hardeeville, and we're delighted to have you with us today to give us an overview and outlook and what you see to come. Thanks for joining us, Mayor Williams.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk fast because we have so many things going on. I'm not even going to be able to get to everything this morning. So I'll talk fast like the Yankee that I am. I'll follow up just real quickly with from Dr. Von Nessen. Hardeeville is certainly gives testimony to what he said about the building going on for home building in particular. Hardeeville, in the 3 years from 2017 to 2019, those 3 years were up 154% in single-family home permits. And in spite of the pandemic this year, where things slowed down for a month or two, we're going to have over 600 single-family home permits for the first time. That'll be up 15%, bringing the 4-year total up 200% in the last 4 years, just in single-family home permitting. I firmly believe that there will be nobody left in New Jersey and Connecticut in the coming decade. I think everybody who's retiring will be coming back down to South Carolina. We really have been booming. And most of them, the primary ones, come out of Sun City and Margaritaville. And that's really a tribute to the Hilton Head brand. Again, Dr. Van Nessen said that Hilton Head would be a primary target. And that's why we call it Sun City Hilton Head, Margaritaville Hilton Head, and Hilton Head Lakes. So we take advantage of that brand quite a bit. But the big thing about Hardeeville in the coming decade, for me, the population's going to grow. And we'll probably go in the 2020 census around 9,000 people, up from 2010 at 3,000. And we're quoting 30,000 in 2030. Whether that happens or not, who knows? But certainly it's going to be a big increase. But the big news about Hardeeville, what Hardeeville is going to contribute to the Low Country are jobs, jobs, and jobs. And that's what we're really excited about. There's 7,500 acres under planned development districts just in the southern part of our city that is between 12 and 18 minutes from the Port of Savannah. So regardless of what happens with the Jasper Ocean Terminal, and we are very excited about that still, Southern Jasper County and Hardeeville are going to grow tremendously because of the port activity that's happening at Savannah. And there is only a capacity rate of 2.57% in Georgia. So what that means is that Hardeeville, and that's 7,500 acres, is the closest available land to the Savannah port that they need for support, warehousing, logistics, and light industry that are coming because of the support of that port. Now that's a tremendous thing, and obviously Exit 3 was a big announcement. So I want to give just some of the highlights of Exit 3. We're anticipating, now this isn't going to be an astonishing number to you, that the impact of Exit 3 in developing those 7,500 acres will bring approximately, in the next 10 years when that has been built out, 26,000 new jobs. That'll cover at least a radius of 50-mile radius, which means the whole Low Country will benefit from the jobs that are coming from that region. We projected out $1.1 billion in wages coming out of that area. Now, just think about the impact of income taxes and the home building that we talked about before that this whole area will have. We're also projecting in that area $4.5 billion worth of new investment. And that's why I'm so excited about the jobs that are bringing to that part of our city for the entire Low Country. Now, just to give you some of the impact, the local impact. For those of you who have read, part of the way we're funding Exit 3 is a tax increment financing loan from the State Infrastructure Bank. There's $26 million. So there's a 1,600 acre parcel around that new exit that's part of that zone that pays for that loan. In other words, the future taxes that come from the development of that 1,600 acres, a portion of those taxes go to repay the loan. The portion averages out over the 15 years of the loan, 20%. So in other words, the three taxing entities, city, county, and schools, retain 80% of the taxes that come out of that during the 15-year payback of the loan. And of course, 100% after that. When that's built out, it's projected to generate those 1,600 acres, $18.6 million per year that will go to city, county, and the highest millage is the school. So it greatly affects the income of the Jasper County School District. So that's really, really very exciting, that particular project. Now, one of the things that got us over the top, there's a company out of Charleston, a developer called Grambling Brothers. Great company, great developer, great reputation. That's going to develop the 3,100 acres remaining in what's known as the Riverport section. And that is the section where Exit 3 is being built. So we have a good team going there. But the good news has already started. Last March 19, a company, investment group called North Signal Capital, took advantage of the opportunity zone legislation that was spearheaded by Senator Scott. And they invested, they bought 500 acres in that Riverport section. And their plan is to invest $250 million over the next 10 years in 10 of what we'll call spec buildings. And what their plan is to put up a building, rent it out. They will not sell it. They'll rent it because that's how they take advantage of the opportunity zone legislation and the tax credits that come with it. So the first one they started was a 140,000 square foot building that was given their CO this summer. They already have a very well-known national retailer signed a lease. We cannot announce who it is until next spring because they're retrofitting the 60,000, 70,000 square feet of that building that they're going to be renting. And they asked us to hold off that announcement until that's completed and they're ready to move in next spring. So it's really exciting. The second building, which is part of a pad that will accommodate 600,000 square feet, the first 300,000 of which is already, the walls are already going up. It has amazing, it's called tilt wall construction, I think it is. Kind of neat. And that's going up, and that will be ready the latter part of spring, early summer of 2021. And they're already working on, of course, trying to get leases into that. So that's really, that's undergoing. Across the street, there's a tract of 800 acres called the Savannah Tract, and 150 acres we're very close to completing a transaction that would bring 1.5 million square feet of in 3 buildings, 500,000 square foot buildings right across the street from there. Also spec buildings, taking advantage of the opportunity zone legislation with very, very big national investors coming in. Now, part of bringing jobs is also training them for jobs that we're looking at. Instead of minimum wage jobs, we're looking at $50,000 to $70,000 a year jobs. And one of the most important is welding. As soon as last March, when we signed the North Signal Capital deal was completed, one of the investors in that group is a gentleman by the name of Manny Freeman, a successful Wall Street guy, and he started a foundation called the EJF Foundation. And they came in right away and immediately gave the city of Hardeeville a $350,000 grant to start a welding school. We took a portion of our public works building. We partnered with Palmetto Training, Mr. Eddie Jackson out of Charleston, and we started a school. It's free to all Jasper County residents, and we're getting contributions to pay for the tuition for non-Jasper County residents. And the first class, 8 students, graduated September 1st, and they have 3 certificates: welding, OSHA warehouse safety, and forklift driving. And they already, all 8 of them already had job interviews lined up, and we're already into our second class. Mr. Jackson's also using our facilities to do a CDCL commercial driver's license program as well. So, and we're now talking with TCL. We're talking about perhaps TCL taking a broader role and using our facilities to complement their facilities over in Bluffton. So we're not only creating jobs, we're hoping to have a program, an ongoing program where we can train the workers. Now think about what this could bring. If a company comes in and rents part of these many spec buildings that go up, they may need a specialized workforce that they're coming from another part of the country. They can come to us and say, okay, City of Hardeeville, I need 50 workers, but they need 10 weeks of training in these skills. We can take on that role with the subsidy from that company, and in the short term, in the time they need, train that workforce for that specific business. And that's really, I think, one of the exciting parts of this program that we were able to get started with that grant, that we can add another feature that will entice businesses to come to our city and help the entire region. And that's really the thing. And when I was at the SID board asking for this money, I said to them, everyone in this room, we have the opportunity to change the corridor of shame into the corridor of opportunity. And I think that that's really what this is all about. We can change this entire region and the opportunities and jobs for this entire region, and have our young people who for so many years in Jasper County just didn't finish their high school education. Now they will see a reason to complete their education and go on and get training. They're not college bound. They'll be able to get a good paying job, stay in the region that they grew up in, and their families enjoy a quality of life that for many years have been denied the counties like Jasper that have been part of that corridor of shame. So I could go on forever, and I'm going to stop there. I'm timing myself. I already went further than I thought. There's a lot more. We have housing projects going on. We're investing a lot in our community development. Our new rec center is coming. We're talking about renovations of our downtown. So we're putting our new tax revenues to a lot of good uses. And I'm very excited about the prospects, not only for Hardeeville and Jasper County, but for the entire region. Thank you.
Mayor Williams, thank you so much for that informative update. We've had several questions that are coming in, and I wanted to see maybe if you would agree to come back on in the next few weeks and finish some of the other things that you have to share, and then as well allow us a little bit more time to spend on questions. People are very excited about it and what's going on in Hardeeville. You look at the 200% single family home permitting over the last 4 years, pretty incredible. Jobs is certainly something that's music to our ears, and then the economic impact that you have in wages and jobs as well with Exit 3. And we just appreciate you being on, and hopefully you'll be able to fit it in your schedule in the next couple of weeks or so to join us again.
I'd be happy to.
All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That was Mayor Harry Williams from Hardeeville, and with the exciting things that are going on there, and lots of opportunities, as well as opportunities provide needs for leadership, and Mayor Williams is certainly providing that leadership. So thank you to you, Mayor, again. And then our final speaker this morning is Dr. Kelly, and Dr. Kelly was with us last week, the past several weeks, and many comments, Dr. Kelly, about your slides and overview last week, as well as before that. So we're glad to have you back on today and hear what you have to share with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me once again. I'm looking to share my screen, but I'm having some challenges. Hang on. Kelly, if you're on this call and you can share it for me, that would be great. I don't know why I'm having trouble with this. Thank you so much. But I guess, does that mean I need to say next? I think that's true. So Kelly, I can't advance it. So if you would just go to the next slide. Thank you. What I want to focus on today is, again, data, a little bit about influenza, and also I know holidays are coming up, and give an update with regards to recommendations around Thanksgiving travel. Next slide. Here's the data for the last 7 days. Beaufort County, South Carolina, in the USA. Unfortunately, South Carolina is starting to creep up, but Beaufort County continues in their downward trend, but just barely. So for Beaufort, we had 133 new cases. That is more than it was last week. It gives a total of over 6,000 cases, 2 deaths for a total of 81 deaths. In contrast, for South Carolina, with over 6,000 new cases, over 164,000 new cases, 127 new deaths for a total of 3,602 deaths. And the USA, unfortunately, because I'm sure you're aware of what's going on, especially in the Midwest, that we have almost 500,000 new cases in the past week, for total cases of 8,617,022, over 5,000 new deaths in just the past week, 224,000 total deaths. Next slide. What I wanted to do is put these numbers in perspective, click again, and compare it to a death by year by influenza compared to COVID-19 deaths. And if you look at the past 3 years of influenza deaths in South Carolina and in the United States, you can see that it was far less than what we are seeing with COVID-19 deaths. In South Carolina, we would have between 100 and less than 300 deaths, and nationally about 34,000 to 60,000. In just thus far this year, and the year is not over, we've got over 3,000 deaths in South Carolina and almost 250,000 in the United States. And just again, to put this in perspective, COVID-19 is now the 3rd highest cause of death after heart disease and cancer. I hate being the bearer of bad news. We just had several really inspiring, positive presentations. I just wanted to put this in perspective so that people feel motivated to maintain the gains. I believe that it is possible to reopen business if we're careful. Next slide. And to compare with influenza, and those who say, well, COVID-19, it's like the flu, there really isn't any difference. There is quite a profound difference in terms of risk of dying. Hospitalized COVID-19 patients have a much higher risk of complications and 5 times higher risk of death than influenza patients. Next slide. So what are the trends? The numbers speak for themselves. You can see the graph with the U.S. as a whole going into a 3rd surge. Next slide. And that's mostly in the Midwest, though. There are some states that are actually in a downward trajectory, and South Carolina is just barely hanging on at that plateau. But I am worried about upcoming holidays. Next slide. This is our page at a glance. We are now starting to add some additional metrics about trying to identify where there may be clusters of cases and whether they are linked to any certain events, sport events or large gathering events. And I just encourage you, if you want to drill down for more information, zip code, schools, that you can go to this website to find that sort of thing. Next slide. For example, just recently I looked at what was going on in K through 12 schools. We've got kind of surprisingly little transmission associated with elementary schools. What we have seen, though, are, yesterday there were 24 schools. They were all high schools that had 6 to 17 cases associated with the school, and that they were mostly not cohorts that were associated in a classroom setting. They were teams, they were cheerleaders or other sporting events. A couple of weeks ago, had a great presentation from a representative of the airline industry talking about travel by air and all the steps that they are taking to make that safe. And I certainly thought that was an excellent presentation and very credible. I did want to put in some cautionary notes. So if you'll give me the next slide, I want to tell a couple of stories. Next slide. Thank you. So this is, once again, do masks really work? Next slide. Last spring, before people were in the habit of wearing masks, This is an example of a group where there were no masks on a plane, 10-hour commercial flight, 217 passengers and crew. The index case, meaning the person who was infected, is seated in first class and is the little red rectangle. 16 people were infected on that flight, 12 of whom, 75%, were seated in business class. Seating proximity was strongly associated with increased infection risk. So, okay, we've made this point again and again. No masks greatly increases your risk. But what about the flip side? How much do masks protect you? Next slide. United Arab Emirates has a very strict mask mandate. They not only require masking in the waiting area and on the flights, they politely remind people to replace their masks if a mask has been removed for eating or drinking. And among 58 passengers who were later shown to be COVID-19 positive on a total of 5 flights of 8 hours each, they exposed over 1,500 passengers. United Emirates Airlines follows up with people. They do routine screening of passengers post-landing. There were 0 secondary cases identified at day 14. So 1,500 people exposed, 0 cases secondarily transmitted. Next slide. Masks on a plane work. This is very recent published article about a flight in Ireland. The airline had taken great steps to reducing occupancy. All those blue rectangles are empty seats, 17% occupancy, 7-hour flight. People were recommended to wear masks, but they didn't necessarily wear masks. We don't know who the index case was, the first case. What we do know is that those darker orange rectangles are people who, once they got off the plane and were tested, they were all tested positive for coronavirus, and they did further genetic testing. They all had the exact same strain. These are not people who knew each other before they boarded. Some of them are in groups. That's what the numbers are, 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are groups traveling together. But clearly, either on the plane or before boarding, somehow these people came together and infected one another. Next slide. This is the key point I want to make, though. Those people, those 13 people who on the plane who had the same phylogenetics, same strain of virus, then once they landed, went on to various social gatherings. And there was further secondary spread to 46 more people for a total of 59 cases. This is what I think of as the Thanksgiving scenario that worries me, that people will think they're safe, and then they'll go because they're getting together as family, but they're getting together with separate households from different places. So our recommendation is going to be this holiday season, if you travel, wear the mask even in flight and restrict activities after flight. Continue to be careful. We've got beautiful weather in South Carolina. If you can, gather together for a holiday meal outside, that would be the best thing. Avoid large social gatherings. Keep your loved ones safe this year so no one is missing from next year's holiday. Next slide. So this is a cool little visual. If you'll click on that, this is just trying to show the effect of secondary spread and what might happen without preventive measures. Oops, maybe not. That's okay. There we go. So starting with one person and all these individual steps, if people, look at the difference in the number of people who could have received secondary, tertiary, it's onward spread, and go ahead to we'll let it run again. And what could be done by those simple actions of if that one person wore a mask, if that one person stayed home, if that other person socially didn't go to a party, they socially distanced, what might result? Next slide. And that concludes my presentation for today. You can go ahead and click to the next slide. I'm happy to take questions and to hear any input of what sort of presentations you would like to hear in the future. And once again, you are more than welcome to share my slides, to use my slides anywhere you want.
Very good, Dr. Kelly. Thank you. Our first question is coming from Tommy. And Tommy is asking for those on the fence about getting a flu shot this year, what do you have to say to them?
I got my flu shot. My husband got his flu shot. I think getting the flu shot every year is important, but no year more important. This may be the most important flu shot you get in your life, because if you have the flu and unfortunately contract COVID-19, can you imagine how those two are going to work synergistically, and you may be much more ill? So getting the flu shot will do several things. Number one, if it prevents you from getting the flu, or even if it doesn't 100% prevent it, it reduces the seriousness of the illness so that you can stay home. You don't need to visit the doctor. Then that reduces your chances of exposing yourself to COVID-19. But most importantly, I think by getting the flu shot, preventing the influenza, preventing you from lowering your resistance will help to protect you from COVID-19.
Dr. Kelly, you touched on this briefly, but Jill is asking, with families getting together for Thanksgiving and the holidays, what precautions do you recommend?
As much as possible, not sharing a home. I mean, if people are traveling and might normally stay in a house with the family that's hosting a party, our recommendation would be go to the meal, but don't stay overnight. It's a matter of reducing duration of exposure. So I know that that's terribly inconvenient and seems counter to the whole family time concept, but it would be better if they stayed a hotel, Airbnb, something local rather than staying in the same home. And the other is, if at all possible, to have the Thanksgiving meal outside, or at least with doors and windows wide open.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Next question is coming from Dorothy, and Dorothy is asking, is it possible to get flu-like symptoms from the flu shot?
It is. Now, the flu shot does not give you the flu. You've probably heard that a million times and thought, I'm not sure if I really believe that. But what the flu shot does, and this is in fact true for all immunizations, what it does is it stimulates what's called your innate immune system. It's like the first responders on the scene when you get an infection. That's what gives you achiness, maybe a little bit of fever. It's not because you have the flu. It's because the flu shot is stimulating your immune system to respond. And the first responders make you feel a little ill, but they do that to stimulate your body to then make antibodies. So if you feel achy when you get a flu shot, it's because that flu shot is doing its job. It is stimulating your immune system.
Okay. Next question comes to us from Lois, and Lois is asking, what percentage of positive cases are asymptomatic?
That unfortunately, we don't 100% know that, right? We're not doing enough testing in this country to catch all the asymptomatic people. I have seen estimates going from 40% to 80%, but it varies also by age. It's estimated that up to 80% of children are asymptomatic, children under age 10. In older adults, it's rare for someone, say, age 65 or over, to be asymptomatic. They may be pre-symptomatic, meaning they don't have any symptoms the first 2 days and then get symptoms. Probably an overall general estimate is at least 40%, probably higher. Many people are not completely asymptomatic. They're asymptomatic when they get tested, but most people do eventually develop some symptoms.
All right, thank you. For those of you who are listening on Facebook or on the Beaufort County channel or directly on our feed here, please email us this week and let us know what you would like Dr. Kelly to cover next week. She's so good about being so responsive and answering questions and that. So let us know some topics and we'll get them to Dr. Kelly for next week. And Dr. Kelly, thank you again for joining us this week. Terrific presentation, and we look forward to hearing from you next week.
Thank you. Glad to do it.
Okay. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
That's going to conclude things for us today. Thanks for everybody tuning in. I want to remind you as we exit the call to be kind, stay safe, and wear your mask. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.